Here we go again. It's a NEWSHOUND special edition spéciale, edition spéciale for you. And let's get into it. This is going to be looking at the first real appearances in British newspapers of Aurelio Peccei. Now, you may not know who Aurelio Peccei is. I know who Aurelio Peccei is. He's one of the founders of the Club of Rome. Do you know who the Club of Rome are? Well, they're a very influential group that produced a document in 1972 called Limits to Growth, and suggested that basically the Malthusian idea that if we want to grow industry and etc., then the population has got to decrease. And the idea that the enemy of humanity is humans, the old way of saying that we're the evil thing on this planet. It was Alexander King, who was a British chemist, and he was involved in lots of institutions and groups, would found the Club of Rome alongside a lot of other members, including Aurelio Peccei. And Aurelio Peccei was an industrialist. But who did he work for? Well, he actually worked for Fiat, who were big military contractors as well. And the Club of Rome and their Malthusian ideas were pernicious. By 1973, he would be the keynote speaker at the third World Economic Forum event. Aurelio Peccei, representing the Club of Rome and talking about limits of growth, would say on stage, the enemy of humanity is humans. So is man itself. So we've got to go and look through some of this. So welcome, my friends, my buddies, my listeners, my watchers, my co-fighters, my comrades, the people who are helping to expose these Malthusian bastards for what they really are. Welcome to another NEWSHOUND. Let's get into it. I'm also probably going to include a clip from The Greatest Reset where I talk about Aurelio Peccei a little bit. Maybe I've already included, maybe it's at the start, who knows, I haven't edited it yet, but it's well worth noting and seeing. So here we go. Let's share my screen, my friends, and let's start off as we do with NEWSHOUND, going to some obscure paper and obscure time. We're going to go to the Birmingham Post. It is number 35,948 of the Birmingham Post. Cost 3 pence. It was on Tuesday, February the 5th, 1974. So this is a year after, almost exactly, just over a year after Aurelio Peccei's keynote speaker at the World Economic Forum at Davos. And it's 2 years after Limits to Growth was produced. And I find what we're going to look here is very interesting. I'm sure you will find it interesting if you're into that sort of thing, if you like this sort of thing, chasing down the Malthusian bastards. Let's go into the article. Here we are. And the article itself is called Worrying About the Way the World is Shaping. So that seems to be the title there. And as you see on the top, that's not Aurelio Peccei's face. That's Pierre Trudeau, the supposed father of a very famous current world leader, Justin Trudeau, who's possibly, he was really like, oh, look at this model, like young man who's going to represent this new generation of young global leaders who come out of the World Economic Forum. Now, for a lot of people who know my research, I've been able to expose a few things about Klaus Schwab's history, and one of them was that he attended and was trained through a CIA-funded course, funded by such groups as the Farfield Foundation, American Friends in the Middle East, and the Asian Foundation. Harvard would have the thing called Kissinger's International Seminar, and it was a way of training up young global leaders. It was the original template of the now infamous Young Global Leaders project from the World Economic Forum. And of course, Klaus Schwab was trained through this CIA-funded seminar, and that's extremely interesting. But so was Pierre Trudeau. This man here on the screen was funded by, was trained up and given funding by the CIA, which is fantastically interesting. So his son's now in power. This is how it is, you know. This isn't, you got to understand that these people, they are family lines. They're doing the same things as kings and queens did before. They rule over you. You have no say. They put both people who get put into power, you have either that choice over here or that choice over here, and then no choice at all. They're trained up by the same intelligence agency funded projects. And of course, anybody who read the Kissinger Continuum, my third part in the Schwab series, will also know that the Young Global Leaders project program itself with the World Economic Forum, when it was redesigned in 2004, was actually given its initial £1 million of seed funding through the Dan David Foundation while Kissinger was on the board. And it was the Kissinger Continuum, going right round in a circle. He trains Schwab, he trains Pierre Trudeau, and he trains many other world leaders, and many other world leaders who are trained through this program will come up. Some of the others will come up during this article. Let's get into it, though. Let's get into a bit of NEWSHOUND and have a look at what's going on in the past. 2 presidents and 4 prime ministers are among the delegates now gathered at Kleisheim Castle near Salzburg. Salzburg, I believe, is Austria. Tell me if I'm wrong. You can leave a comment saying that's not in Austria, you idiot, but I think they are. To try and agree on a realistic and practical forecast of population, food, and energy problems. So let's put, because these are all problems they're saying. Pardon, I'm just getting over the flu. Maybe it's COVID, I don't know. But I'm going to be a bit gruff during this. So here we go. So let's look at that. Population problems, food problems, energy problems. That first one, population problems. I hate it. I hate that term because I mean, there has to be a growing population if you want to expand. They know this. But then there's a lack of food, apparently. Malthus would say, you know, when you've got too much population, you can't be able to produce enough food, and you know, it's bad for the environment, and etc. etc. But this isn't true. In actual fact, the modern farming techniques and methods, if used responsibly, can feed the entire world. But instead of, say, like I've heard it said, and maybe it's wrong, maybe it's right, maybe it's an exaggeration, that the Congo in Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, that if that was farmed correctly, it could feed the entire world, you know? It's an abundant it's abundant in resources, etc. We could solve all of these problems, as they say, the pollution problem, population problem, the food problem, and energy problems. We could actually sort that out if there was impetus to do so quite easily. But that doesn't suit their narrative, because then they don't get to be in control. If there's too many people, they can control you. There's too many people. Some people will say, wait a minute, these guys are doing malevolent things. Let's bring them down. That's what they don't want. So it says, so to agree on realistic and practical forecasts of population, food, and energy problems for the guidance of the world's politicians, businessmen, and the institutions. E.B. Brook reports from Vienna. No, Vienna is definitely Austria. I know, because of the Falco song, Vienna Calling. I love that tune. I love Falco. On how the meeting came to be and what it hopes to achieve. So Pierre Trudeau, one of the 4 premiers at the conference. Yeah, there's a brilliant picture of Pierre Trudeau shaking hands with Henry Kissinger as well, because they knew each other very well. Of course, he went through a CIA-funded course just like Klaus Schwab, Kissinger's international seminar. The initiative came from the Club of Rome, a private organization of businessmen, scientists, technicians, and some politicians set up a few years ago through the efforts of Signor Aurelio Peccei. He is a former vice president, Olivetti organization, and the chairman of Fiat Group. Now, I think Olivetti were a computer group back in the day. They and that would make sense because Club of Rome produced computer models, which are just like they were like lines. Look at these lines showing that if we don't take control of the world, we'll all die. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, you know, really early sort of simulations on population growth were done through such methods, early computer methods, and the chairman of the Fiat Group. So Fiat Group, you can understand the Fiat Group had lots of military contracts. And so this guy isn't just any old guy. This guy's got connections with some very interesting things, as we'll find out. A man of great vigor, Signor Peccei, they're really giving it. They're like, oh, he's such a great guy. He's such a good guy. A man of great vigor, Signor Peccei, toured the world to get this meeting off the ground, just like Herman Kahn and John Kenneth Galbraith went back with Schwab to Europe before the creation of the World Economic Forum to get people on board for its creation. Signor Aurelio Peccei did the same to get this meeting off the ground. So these people were very they were instrumental in creating a narrative and rebranding things and getting other people on board with it, rebranding these things as necessary crises that need the attention of world leaders. Political circumstances dogged his footsteps after a coup in Chile, place where I am right now. No one in power in South America wants to stray very far from home. A similar wariness has long obtained in Asia. President Bourguiba of Tunisia is too busy with proposed merger of his country with Libya to leave despite his early enthusiasm. No, I never knew about that. The proposed merger of Tunisia with Libya. Obviously, it didn't work out, did it? And I would assume that's where Gaddafi really started to rise to fame. But I mean, I could be wrong there. I don't know about that. So, with the big powers deliberately excluded from what is essentially a conference of smaller, weaker states, the big names at Gleichem are Olaf Palme of Sweden, Pierre Trudeau of Canada, and Huub den Uyl of Holland. The club, though a private group, has impressive credentials. It's supported by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Now, a place which we know has is deep in establishment fuckery. More than 100 technical and businessmen and a number of senior OECD officials. Nor is its foresight to be dismissed. Its work so far in estimating and warning about the state of the world was a forecast that food resources would be exhausted in about a generation and oil resources within a few years. Many derided these caveats until the energy crisis burst upon the world. Well, I can tell you, this is 1974, and they're saying that food resources are forecast to be exhausted in about a generation. That's 40 years. I'm not sure if food resources have been exhausted because I ate quite well this morning. In about a generation, and oil resources within a few years. So before 1980, the oil resources would be gone. Oh, did that happen? No. Why? Because it's a load of bullshit. Yes, it is. Club of Rome, big bag of balls. Many derided these caveats until the energy crisis. So they say, oh, many derided, many said that it wouldn't happen until the energy crisis burst upon the world. A created energy crisis, a manipulated energy crisis that I think may have been what ended up with Kissinger creating the petrodollar. something which until this year was extremely strong and kept America as a dominant force when it came down to purchasing oil and petroleum and gas. Because everything would have to be, all of that would have to be traded in dollars. Now that is coming under fire with Saudi Arabia saying, no, we can do it in rubles and yen or whatever it is. In China, in its yuan, I think it is. In its present meeting, which the club hopes will be the first of a series, the members seek to provide studies of world conditions and prospects which will be of interest and value to governments, unions, and all others with influence on social conditions. These guys influence on social condition, you mean influence on how to kill people. It's probably what they mean more. The pity of it is that the developing world is so thinly represented, and that the smaller communist states have paid little or no attention. That's interesting. Because they're saying like, oh, communist states, they haven't paid enough attention to all of this. It's communist, it's still, you know, that East versus West dynamic is still going, but it's no longer like a war dynamic. Now it's a different dynamic by this point. It's a competitive dynamic. They know that the communists are losing, that eventually it's gonna, the East is gonna fall. And even the East knows this. They're having extremely heavy problems. They got by this point a lot bigger fish to fry. Signor Peccei, Signor Peccei may be an idealist, but his conferences are neither the big business type of meeting nor the leftish type favored by some groups of states, which seem to spend most of their time on ritual denunciations rather than accomplishing anything. There's a lot of like underhand comments in this article, I noticed. Signor Peccei, a businessman, much respected and listened to in his native Italy, seems greatly dismayed at the way the world is developing. We can confidently expect him to make further sorties against such complacencies as may still remain. Now, I find that interesting as well, Cindy, a businessman, much respected and listened to in his native Italy. How would we know this? How would we know this is true? What if you went back then and you said, what do you think is in your Peccei to a load of Italians? I bet you get a mixed bag anyway. They like to say, oh, this guy, he knows what you think, and everybody in his homeland knows he knows what he's saying. But of course, this is more than this. This is about the takeover of our society by these guys who went through Kissinger's international seminar and the creation of a globalist world order, then would be described as the new world order, and now is probably best described as the globalist world order, led by people like Pierre Trudeau, and now led by his son, Justin Trudeau. You know, they're moving forward with these ideas. Now, that's a very interesting article, because it kind of like shows us that they were really looking to propaganda, put out positive propaganda, positive spin for people like Aurelio Peccei, and what they were doing at the Club of Rome, when in actual fact, if you actually research and read between the lines here, you can work out what they really say is that we need to reduce population. What does that mean? Oh, birth control? Yeah, of course, birth control. Abortions? Yeah, abortion. There's other ways too, isn't there? There's other ways. That's what they were concentrating on. And we've seen some of the ways nowadays. Some viruses have been released that some people would say were released on purpose because they want to control world population, and every little helps. So here's a second piece here, and this is from, let's quack it up. This is from the Coventry Evening Telegraph, which became the Coventry Telegraph eventually, and was very popular back then, a very popular newspaper, at least in the Midlands of Britain. And this is 2 years before October the 13th, birthday of Margaret Thatcher. would you believe? How do I know that? Because it's also my sister's birthday, and I used to call her Maggie at times. 1971. And here we go. Underneath this, new names, a Jackson Group board. Well, is a lecture by Fiat director. And so this was the initial mention of Aurelio Peccei. This is the first mention of him. So lecture by Fiat director, the United Kingdom Automation Council's annual lecture to be given by Dr. Aurelio Peccei, head of the Rome management consulting firm, which I would assume became the Club of Rome the following year, and director of Fiat, Olivetti, and other companies in London on Wednesday, October 20th. His subject will be on how to survive on the planet Earth. How to survive. Does it, do you mean we should probably kill some people? Because this is what they're talking about. When you cut away and you don't even have to read between the lines, you just have to do the math. What does population reduction and population control mean? What does it mean? Well, I can tell you what it means. It means the murder of potential lives, the restriction of people's ability to procreate. Yeah, you could say in a poor African country where you've got like 8 to 10 kids per family, and they don't have enough food to feed themselves. Okay, you can take that as an example of where you could reduce family size through education, and through better services and providing these people better services, so that they know, well, actually, if I have that many kids, I won't be able to afford to live, won't be able to afford to feed them. That'll be really negative for everybody and for the lives of these children. So, there is something to be said about having smaller families, but when you have more education, better education in the country, you see the family size reduce anyway, because it's about maths. It's about learning maths. It's about 1 add 1 equals 2, and 1 add 9 equals too many kids. You can't afford it. And often, this leads people to have, if they've got too many kids and no way to support them, it means they make terrible decisions. A lot of the time, they'll sell off their kids. If you've got 10 kids, you can't afford them, and someone offers you some money to take one of your oldest kids to work for them, you do it. You're not even going to ask questions necessarily, because you can't afford life, and it'll help feed the rest of the kids for a small amount of time. And this is the situation you find in a lot of third world countries, where people are able to be persuaded to give up their kids for the fact that they can't afford to keep them. There is something to be said about educating the people in the world on why to have decent and manageable family sizes. But decent and manageable doesn't mean population reduction. It doesn't mean that. Because in actual fact, if there's lots of land, there's lots of resources, they're just not used properly. And big companies, such as Fiat and others, have a history of polluting water sources, which are the veins of life, and killing people in their own way. So I find this article about Aurelio Peccei a very interesting way to start your journey into understanding where this Malthusian idea of population control comes from. And of course, the more you understand, the more you'll see there's a malevolent and Malthusian backdrop to it all. Now, one thing I discovered recently, which is really interesting, is that Klaus Martin Schwab is an anagram, has a few anagrams within it. One of them is Malthusians. One of them is charlatanisms. One of them is black shirts. That's interesting, isn't it? Just very interesting that Klaus Martin Schwab, you mix them up and you can get Malthusians. That's a very exact word. I'm not suggesting anything but that, because people who will know my research know that I've tracked down Klaus Martin Schwab down to the point where he was born. So he was born and called that by his father, Eugen Schwab. Now that's hilarious, because eugenics, I was nicknaming him Eugenic Schwab for a long time. And you wonder whether or not that had something to do with the naming of the family, and they had some sort of obsession about this sort of thing. But I find this article very interesting. Okay, so there's one more thing that I want to look at here. And normally I do a nice, funny old look at the same sort of news or something that's an offshoot. And this is an offshoot more than funny. I'm sorry that you're not going to get your funny bit this week. But Aurelio Peccei wasn't only involved in Fiat and Olivetti. Later on, very soon after these Malthusian Club of Rome speeches, he was involved in a very interesting project that would eventually go bottoms up. But the invention of Concorde. Yes, Concordia and all of that. Let's have a little look at this. Let's look at another article from the past. And I want to, again, I'm going to put on my glasses for this. My teaching glasses. They're plastic reading glasses, so forgive me. And this is from the Illustrated News, I think it's called. Let me see. It's Illustrated London News. And it's the politics of Concorde. Now, keep in mind that, like I say, Aurelio Peccei was involved in the creation of Concorde, and Concorde was an extremely polluting plane. It was one that was like, oh, this is for really posh people to fly around. It's much faster. It's got a pointy end. It goes down. It's wonderful. And Concorde was given this big like launch, and was said to be the best planes around and all of this. Well, it didn't work out well for him. So let's have a quick look at this. The politics of Concorde. Concorde issues satisfactorily would cause damage, he said on his return from Washington, that he had given President Carter a clear and solemn warning that if New York succeeded in barring Concorde, this would create a serious crisis in US-French relations. The difference of attitudes was seen more striking at the public level. Tony Benn, who had to argue more over Concorde inside Britain than he ever had with Americans. Let me read that again. Tony Benn, a famous Labour Party proper socialist. Tony Benn, who had to argue more over Concorde inside Britain than he ever had to with Americans, pointed out the differences rely in an article he wrote while he was in opposition. When a Frenchman hears Concorde's supersonic bang, he wrote, it feels swell of pride in his chest. When an Englishman hears it, he thinks it is an outrageous invasion of his privacy. The outrage came in France when the Americans talked of barring the plane. Resentment at American power is close to the surface of most Frenchmen, as it was among Britons in 1950s and the early 1960s. When the United States was seen to be taking over Britain's global role, this had dwindled in Britain now. As this country's great power status fades into the past and people become more preoccupied with domestic problems. But it remains in France. So far as most French people are concerned, those Americans who tried to keep out Concorde did so because it was a European aircraft and not because it was noisy. The argument over Concorde's landing rights added bold colors and a sharp outline to a picture of the United States that it is already half formed in most French minds, as a greedy giant gobbling up most of the world's goods and trade, and trying to prevent anyone else from getting a fair share in the name of some wider cause. Now, this is very interesting because the United States, by 1947, when they're creating the CIA and they're looking to do coups in different regions in the Middle East, at the start of their coups. I mean, 1952 was overthrowing King Farouk, 1953 overthrowing Mohammed Mossadegh, and they were seen as soulless behemoth. They were seen as this greedy giant gobbling up most of the world's goods and trade and trying to prevent anyone else from getting a fair share in the name of some wider cause. This is how the world viewed America. So it wasn't only France, it wasn't only the Middle East, it was the entire world. And they tried to change this picture of America, but they couldn't. And it's still seen like this because that's what they do. They want you to believe that America is some form of democracy, free and fair, but it's only free and fair for the people who are making money right at the top of America. It really is capitalism personified. They believed it was this desire to eliminate competition in trade and technology and not NATO's real need that lay behind the decision to adopt the McDonnell Douglas F-15 as the next NATO fighter plane instead of a European aircraft. They believe that this, and not only a desire to halt the spread of nuclear weapons, lay behind the US administration's attempt to stop the sale of French nuclear fuel reprocessing plant to Pakistan. This is very interesting because Kissinger was really heavily involved in that. And this is like the Pakistani, the tilt to Pakistan under Kissinger was very interesting because publicly Kissinger was threatening Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the beginning of the 70s, the third and fourth prime minister, third or fourth, or maybe both, prime minister of Pakistan. He was threatening him publicly. Well, at the same time, they were trying to help them gain to proliferate nuclear weapons because there had been a change in how they believed nuclear weapons should be viewed throughout the world. That the more people who had nuclear, the more countries who had nuclear weapons, the less likely you were to see a problem with nuclear war or potential nuclear war, because it meant that people were scared to press the button because all of those surrounding them also had ability to press that button in return and wipe out their entire country. Now, it's very simple, but the French nuclear, a very simplistic way to look at it, but the French nuclear fuel reprocessing plant to Pakistan, that sailed to stop. Well, that was done partially on purpose because it was a really Zulfikar Ali Bhutto of Pakistan had said basically we need some nuclear fuel, done this deal with the French, and then they found it way too expensive and wanted to get out of it, and it was Kissinger who helped them get out of it by the calls to halt the nuclear reprocessing when France was opening a reprocessing plant. Very interesting. A Paris newspaper editorial demanded that when France confronted this call, will this be another Concorde situation? The argument over Concorde are by no means over yet. Its permission to land in New York is only temporary, and new hearings on noise levels are to be held. It is still flying and still costing the taxpayers money. Recently, a House of Commons committee on public expenditure concluded that each Concorde costs so much to produce that we should not make any more, even if there are orders for them, because the cost of production will exceed the sale price. Well, that doesn't sound like a good idea, does it? Sorry, I did forget what the first couple of lines are on the French. That's what the first couple of lines are. You'll see where we're getting to soon. So a little bit more. The French are not likely to agree to this if any other airline wants some, because they seem to be willing to pay to keep the flag flying. Edward Ducan, the chairman of the committee that drew up the report, said afterwards, I can see very strong pressure from the EEC partners, and not only France, to keep Concorde flying so that the newest long-distance airliners are not all American. And what of the future? Both BAC, the aerospatial and Aerospatial agreed that there is a future in supersonic air travel. They talk of future versions of Concorde and new planes. Neither would like to see the United States take over the field now that they have done so much expensive groundwork. Boeing and Lockheed are now working on supersonic planes that would use new materials and new multi-cycle engine that can beat the noise problem, though this engine is still more than a dream on the drawing board. A little more than a dream on the drawing board. Now, here we go. This is where we're going to get into the real nuts and bolts of what this Concorde argument is all about and how it relates to what we were talking about before. So, like I say, slightly related article. This is what we do in NEWSHOUND. We hound in the news. We sniffy. And here we're doing it. Frenchmen in the aircraft industry talk of Europe-wide cooperation on the next supersonic airline and perhaps cooperation with the United States as well, since the cost once again would be enormous. If the United States is not willing, and perhaps if Britain is not willing, then why not with the Soviet Union? This is not unthinkable, they say, and will become less so if the Socialist Communist Alliance wins the French election next March. Overlaying all these potential arguments on the political level, there is a fundamental discord between the spirit behind Concorde and the spirit of our times. For the 15 years of this project cover a profound change in people's thinking. At the beginning of this period, the idea of progress still ruled in the popular mind, and progress was associated with technological achievement. It was taken for granted that with the passing of time, technology would enable man to go farther and faster. The makers of Concorde set about what seemed like a heroic endeavor, confident that they carried with them the hopes and dreams of their populations. In those days, only a few scientists contemplated seriously the limitations of Earth's resources. The Club of Rome was not yet founded, and the environmentalist movement was small and marginal. Even nuclear power was largely unchallenged. People's dreams, sorry about that. People's dreams have changed since then. Technological progress has been downgraded to the popular scale of values. People question its worth in principle and will look at the price at least as closely as the benefit in any particular instance. They are more likely than they were to question the value of transporting a few people at very high speeds and measure it against the cost in resources, skills, and inconvenience to the people on the ground. We don't know whether the limitations of resources will slow down technological progress or how far society will do so voluntarily. Whether or not more Concordes take to the skies will demonstrate the answer to these questions and others as well. Well, Concorde didn't actually last much longer, but what's very interesting, we go back up here, is this. They seem to use it. This is 1977, and they saying now, this is really interesting. They say in those days, only a few scientists contemplated seriously the limitations of the Earth's resources. The Club of Rome was not yet founded, and the environmentalist movement was small and marginal. Like the Club of Rome were correct in their assumption. You know, this is Club of Rome weren't founded, so how would people know that we have limitations to growth? You know, that we have limits to growth. Would people know when the Club of Rome wasn't founded? And the environmental movement was small and marginal. That's because it was created around the same time by roughly the same people who wanted to control our resources in a way that suits them. So I find this article extremely interesting, the politics of Concorde, and Aurelio Peccei was, like I say, involved in that. So, my friends, that is the episode of NEWSHOUND this week. I will leave you, definitely now, I've decided, I will leave you with a little clip from The Greatest Reset. Documentary involves that it includes people like myself, Whitney Webb, Peter McCulloch, um, Robert Malone, who I'm not sure I trust fully, and other very famous and very good people who work very hard looking at whether the ideologies of these rich elitists were based on fact, or were based on a principle of them making money and being in control of all of the world's resources, because that's what it's really about, isn't it? The Club of Rome, and the Club of Rome in general, was doing that. That's what they were doing. They were trying to control our resources. They were trying to say, look, the elite have to be in control, because people don't know any better and they don't realize there's too many of us. And so we've got to start limiting that growth. And as you've seen from the first article, these people, from all of the articles I've mentioned, these people were lauded as being inspirational visionaries for our modern times. They were, some of these people were fundamental in the creation of environmentalism, where I believed, I mean, I was told all through my life, the environment, you got to save the environment, you got to save the environment. Then I started to question it. Now, I'm not saying I'm a climate change denier, but I don't see it. You know, climate changes naturally. The Earth is way too big for our little footprint to be enough. And loads of people say that's not so. Automatically, they're trained to. The majority of people, even some of my closest friends, will be like, environmentalism. Yeah, you got to protect the environment. Yeah, you got to protect the environment. From who? From the people who are currently saying that you got to protect the environment in their way, because that's not right. You know, we got to protect the environment from them, not from us. We've got to create a world that's sustainable for us, and not let them, the industrialists like Aurelio Peccei and the like, who are working in military contracts, trying to kill the world. And we're going to trust them to actually give us an honest solution for our future problems? Don't think so. Doesn't sound good to me. Makes me feel a little bit inside. So please enjoy the clip, and I hope you will return for the next NEWSHOUND, which I promise the next NEWSHOUND will have a funny bit at the end. I'm sorry this one doesn't, but we're talking about the Club of Rome, the Malthusians, and none of it is funny. None of it. None of it. The only way that I'd see I'd see justice as being done is if these people were the people whose growth was limited, that these industrialists were the ones who were on the chopping block. That's what I'd like to see. And maybe that's what we'll see in the near future. For now, from NEWSHOUND and from my lovely cup of tea, English breakfast tea in Chile, thank you for joining me. And this is Johnny Vedmore, and I am out of here. Club of Rome was set up in 1968 by Aurelio Peccei, who was an Italian industrialist, and Alexander King, who was a Scottish chemist.
The Club of Rome comprises some 70 men of widely varying backgrounds, but their common concern is that the world problems cannot be solved by individual nations. I spoke with Dr. Aurelio Peccei, founder of the club, and Dr. Alexander King, director of the World Bank and the United Nations OECD.
They really concentrated on population control, on bringing down the population. They had Malthusian ideas.
It's not some science fantasy effect from 2001. This electronic display, emanating from Australia's largest computer, is a picture of the condition, past, present, and future of planet Earth. It was developed under the auspices of the Club of Rome by an MIT research team to present a complex model of the world and what we humans are doing to it. What it does for the first time in man's history on the planet is to look at the world as one system. It shows that Earth cannot sustain present population and industrial growth for much more than a few decades. It shows that simply cleaning up our car exhausts and making some small effort to limit our families simply isn't enough. The condition of the planet starts to become highly critical, and if we don't do anything about it, this is what's going to happen. The quality of life is going to go right back to practically zero. Pollution is going to become so serious, right out here, that it will start to kill people. So the population will diminish. Right back here, less than it was in the year 1900. And at this stage, around about the year 2040, 2050, civilized life as we know it on this planet will cease to exist.
So this Malthusian idea would go along with the introduction of the World Economic Forum.
Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen hier in Davos.
The world has become so interdependent that entrepreneurs everywhere in the world depend each on another.
I think he's very much the top frontman of the ideology of the Rockefellers, Club of Rome, Henry Kissinger. They needed someone in Europe who had had experience with trying to bring people together, bring companies together.
Being a great reset for the post-Corona era.